What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today's May 15th, 2026, exactly 7:50 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 22nd book in our Book to React series, where we read an entire text cover to cover with the people and for the people. This is an open source library and book club where everybody is welcome if you're smart. So we are reading Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution, the longest book we will probably ever read, unless we decide to read the Bible on Book React. We are now entering into chapter 7. This is going to be a long chapter. It's titled 5 Days, February 23rd through February 27th, 1917. We just finished the trilogy of chapters where Trotsky was talking about the Tsar and his palace, the intrigue, the inquiries that could have overthrown him, the circumstances that led up to the revolution, partially because of the ineptitude of the Tsar himself, the people around him, and the liberal opposition that didn't take reins into their own hands. Shout out to my guy Kamal up in the live stream, joining our reading for today, and everybody else who's going to tune in. I have both chats open, unlike yesterday, so I will be replying to both comments, whether you are in the vertical stream or the horizontal stream. Looking forward to getting into this. Without further ado, let's get into our reading for today. Chapter 7, 5 Days, February 23rd through February 27th, 1917. The 23rd of February was International Women's Day. The social democratic circles had intended to mark this day in a general manner, by meetings, speeches, leaflets. It had not occurred to anyone that it might become the first day of the revolution. Not a single organization called for strikes on that day. What is more, even a Bolshevik organization and a militant one, the Vyborg Borough Committee, all workers, was opposing strikes. The temper of the masses, according to Kayarov, one of the leaders of the workers' district, was very tense. Any strike would threaten to turn into an open fight. But since the committee thought the time unripe for militant action, the party not strong enough and the workers having too few contacts with the soldiers, they decided not to call for strikes, but to prepare for revolutionary action at some indefinite time in the future. Such was the course followed by the committee on the eve of the 23rd of February, and everyone seemed to accept it. On the following morning, however, in spite of all directives, the women textile workers in several factories went on strike and sent delegates to the metal workers with an appeal for support. With reluctance, writes Kayarov, the Bolsheviks agreed to this, and they were followed by the workers, Mensheviks, and social revolutionaries. But once there is a mass strike, one must call everybody into the streets and take the lead. Such was Kayarov's decision, and the Vyborg Committee had to agree to it. The idea of going into the streets had long been ripening among the workers. Only at that moment, nobody imagined where it would lead. Let us keep in mind this testimony of a participant, important for understanding the mechanics of the events. Very interesting. First and foremost, pardon my ignorance, I did not know that International Women's Day preceded the Soviet Union. I thought that was something that came mid-20th century through socialist movements. So I didn't know that there was already an International Women's Day. I gotta look up more on that. And secondly, I think this is very fitting. You know, the Soviet Union was one of the earliest proponents of women's rights. I believe they were the first to put a woman into space. Many women were in high rank in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So I think this tracks, and I salute Trotsky for being like an early feminist, if that's the direction he's going in, by highlighting the women's contributions to kicking off the Russian Revolution. Shout out to the Beebs up in the live stream. You can see what we're reading by clicking the description at the top of this video. Continuing now in Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution. It was taken for granted that in case of a demonstration, the soldiers would be brought out into the streets against the workers. What would that lead to? This was wartime. The authorities were in no mood for joking. On the other hand, a reserve soldier in wartime is nothing like an old soldier of the regular army. Is he really so formidable? In revolutionary circles, they had discussed this much, but rather abstractly. For no one, positively no one, we can assert this categorically upon the basis of all the data, then thought that February 23rd was to mark the beginning of a decisive drive against absolutism. The talk was of a demonstration which had indefinite, but in any case, limited perspectives. So Trotsky is saying here, like, this was radical action. We were doing radical action, but we didn't know that this is how it was going to pop off. Nobody thought that February 23rd would be the day that the world would change. You know what I mean? What is it? Lenin has a quote that I don't know exactly where it's from. There are years go by where little happens and weeks where years go by, or something like that, right? So it all just sort of happened at once. The revolution just sparks like that. Okay. Women's rights include to go to space? Hell yeah, absolutely. Continuing here. Thus, the fact is that the February Revolution was begun from below, overcoming the resistance of its own revolutionary organizations, the initiative being taken of their own accord by the most oppressed and downtrodden part of the proletariat, the women textile workers, among them no doubt many soldiers' wives. Damn. Let's read that again, man, because I've been thinking about this since I've started reading this text, and this is one of the common criticisms people have of communist theory of revolution and how to create change. They sort of, or some people have a caricature that communists think that the only way we can get revolution is a bunch of egghead intellectuals, who've read all the books, eventually telling people enough of the problems of capitalism that eventually they get mad enough to overthrow it. When really, when we look through history, like the points I made before about the Haitian Revolution, or what we've seen in American history in relation to the struggles of Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, Latino Americans, the most oppressed people are the ones who carry the most revolutionary fervor, the ones who want to see the system change the most. And of course, they're oppressed by their class, by being, the least paid, the least hired, etc. But also other factors, such as their gender. The women textile workers here were radical. As we see in America, the most radical voices throughout American history have been Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, LGBTQ Americans, etc., etc. Let's read that line again because Trotsky lays it out so powerfully. Thus, the fact is that the February Revolution was begun from below, overcoming the resistance of its own revolutionary organizations, the initiative being taken of their own accord by the most oppressed and downtrodden part of the proletariat, the women textile workers, among them no doubt many soldiers' wives. The overgrown breadlines had provided the last stimulus. About 90,000 workers, men and women, were on strike that day. The fighting mood expressed itself in demonstrations, meetings, encounters with the police. The movement began in the Vyborg district with its large industrial establishments. Thence it crossed over to the Petersburg side. There were no strikes or demonstrations elsewhere. According to the testimony of the secret police, on that day, detachments of troops were called in to assist the police. Evidently, not many of them, but there were no encounters with them. A mass of women, not all of them workers, flocked to the municipal Duma demanding bread. It was like demanding milk from a he-goat. Okay. Trotsky, gross. Ew. Red banners appeared in different parts of the city, and inscriptions on them showed that the workers wanted bread, but neither autocracy nor war. Women's Day passed successfully, with enthusiasm and without victims, but what it concealed in itself no one had guessed, even by nightfall. On the following day, the movement not only fails to diminish, but doubles. About one half of the industrial workers of Petrograd are on strike on the 24th of February. The workers come to the factories in the morning. Instead of going to work, they hold meetings, then begin processions toward the center. New districts and new groups of the population are drawn into the movement. The slogan, bread, is crowded out or obscured by louder slogans. Down with autocracy, down with the war. Continuous demonstrations on the Nevsky. First, compact masses of workmen singing revolutionary songs. Later, a motley crowd of city folk interspersed with the blue caps of students. The promenading crowd was sympathetically disposed toward us, and soldiers in some of the war hospitals greeted us by waving whatever was at hand. How many clearly realized what was being ushered in by this sympathetic waving from sick soldiers to demonstrating workers? But the Cossacks constantly, though without ferocity, kept charging the crowd. Their horses were covered with foam. The mass of demonstrators would part to let them through and close up again. There was no fear in the crowd. The Cossacks promised not to shoot, passed from mouth to mouth. Apparently, some of the workers had talks with individual Cossacks. Later, however, cursing, half-drunken dragoons appeared on the scene. They plunged into the crowd, began to strike at the heads with their lances. The demonstrators summoned all their strength and stood fast. They won't shoot, and in fact, they didn't. Powerful stuff here, man. Powerful stuff here. Shout out to the Beebs. He says, demanding milk from a he-goat is actually a common Russian idiom. It means like pulling teeth or putting lipstick on a pig. Okay, thanks, B. All right, this is the type of comment we want. This is the type of comment we want. I didn't know that was a common Russian phrase. Either way, pause. No diddy. We don't want no milk. We don't want no male goat milk. None of that. But shout out to the Beebs up in the live stream for the funny commentary and also adding on to our reading right here. I appreciate that. That's funny. That's funny. All right. A liberal senator was looking at the dead streetcars, or was that on the following day, and his memory failed him? Some of them with broken windows, some tipped over on the tracks, and was recalling the July days of 1914 on the eve of the war. It seemed that the old attempt was being renewed. The senator's eyes did not deceive him. The continuity is clear. History was picking up the ends of the revolutionary threads broken by the war and tying them in a knot. Poetic. Trotsky is an incredible writer, man. Just an incredibly poetic writer. Throughout the entire day, crowds of people poured from one part of the city to another. They were persistently dispelled by the police, stopped and crowded back by cavalry detachments and occasionally by infantry. Along with shouts of "down with the police" was heard oftener and oftener a hurrah addressed to the Cossacks. That was significant. Toward the police, the crowd showed ferocious hatred. They routed the mounted police with whistles, stones, and pieces of ice. In a totally different way, the workers approached the soldiers. Around the barracks, sentinels, patrols, and lines of soldiers stood groups of working men and women, exchanging friendly words with the army men. This was a new stage, due to the growth of the strike and the personal meeting of the worker with the army. Such a stage is inevitable in every revolution, but it always seems new and does in fact occur differently every time. Those who have read and written about it do not recognize the thing when they see it. So he's talking about some powerful stuff. He's talking about the people coming up against the army. And this is a part of every revolution. If we're talking the American Revolution with, I don't know, the Boston Tea Party or the Boston Massacre, whatever, right? Or the Haitian Revolution when they go against the slave masters and the French army. Or right here, that moment when the people meet the police is when rubber hits the road. All right? And that's real. You know what I mean? All right. So continuing here in the text. In the State Duma that day, they were telling how an enormous mass of people had flooded Znamensky Square and all Nevsky Prospect and the adjoining streets, and that a totally unprecedented phenomenon was observed. The Cossacks and the regiments with bands were being greeted by revolutionary and not patriotic crowds with shouts of "Hurrah!" To the question, what does it all mean? The first person accosted in the crowd answered the deputy. A policeman struck a woman with a knout. I don't know what a knout is. Maybe that's a blackjack. The Cossacks stepped in and drove away the police. Whether it happened in this way or another will never be verified, but the crowd believed that it was so, that this was possible. The belief had not fallen out of the sky. It arose from previous experience and was therefore to become an earnest of victory. See, this is the type of stuff I was telling my guy Kareth about in the comment section for the previous video. Go watch episode 6, the horizontal live stream. We're going back and forth in the comments. I'm reading this book for Commie Inspo. Commie Revolutionary Inspo. And now Trotsky is feeding me. Pause. He is feeding me. No diddy. What I have been looking for in this book. Yes, let's go. The workers at the Ericsson, one of the foremost mills in the Vyborg district, after a morning meeting came out of the Samsonivsky Prospect. A whole mass, 2,500 of them, and in a narrow place ran into the Cossacks. Cutting their way with the breasts of their horses, the officers first charged through the crowd. Behind them, filling the whole width of the prospect, galloped the Cossacks. Decisive moment. But the horsemen, cautiously, in a long ribbon, rode through the corridor just made by the officers. Some of them smiled, Kayarov recalls, and one of them gave the workers a good wink. This wink was not without meaning. The workers were emboldened with a friendly, not hostile, kind of assurance, and slightly infected the Cossacks with it. The one who winked found imitators. In spite of renewed efforts from the officers, the Cossacks, without openly breaking discipline, failed to force the crowd to disperse, but flowed through it in streams. This was repeated 3 or 4 times and brought the two sides even closer together. Individual Cossacks began to reply to the workers' questions and even to enter into momentary conversations with them. Of discipline there remained but a thin, transparent shell that threatened to break through any second. The officers hastened to separate their patrol from the workers, and abandoning the idea of dispersing them, lined the Cossacks out across the street as a barrier to prevent the demonstrators from getting to the center. But even this did not help. Standing stock still in perfect discipline, the Cossacks did not hinder the workers from diving under their horses. The revolution does not choose its paths. It made its first steps toward victory under the belly of a Cossack's horse. A remarkable incident, and remarkable the eye of its narrator, an eye which took an impression of every bend in the process. No wonder, for the narrator was a leader. He was at the head of over 2,000 men. The eye of a commander watching for enemy whips and bullets looks sharp. All right, I wonder if he's firstly, I wonder if he's talking about him, the narrator, as in he's now entered the story and he said he's leading 2,000 men. Is Trotsky finally entering the story? And is he going to be referring to himself as the narrator? Or is he referring to Kayarov? Kayarov was the guy who was there during this event. Or was he also there too? If you have read this book or if you're following along, tell me what you think. Because I'm assuming the narrator is Trotsky at this point. Trotsky or Kayarov. But secondly, there's some debate among leftists about how to think about police, whether all cops are bastards or whether they are working class people that can be on the side of the people. And after reading so far in this, I'm on the latter sort of view, that we should be trying to propagandize to police, to get our police to become communist, socialist, infiltrate the forces, so that when the revolution does pop off, we do have people on our side. The same way the white supremacists, the rednecks, the three-toothed MAGA folks who ran up in the Capitol, they definitely had sympathizers with the Capitol Police. We've seen the videos of the Capitol Police just sort of letting them in. Now, some people say they got the order from top down to just let them in as a way to diffuse shit so that the stupid MAGA folks could just walk in Nancy Pelosi's office and just smear shit on the wall like apes and monkeys, which they are. But I also think that, every movement needs to be infiltrating, of course, the government apparatus. We need to be infiltrating the police, the army, the Marines, Secret Service, etc., so that it makes it possible for revolution to happen. Because when the people meet the police, that's when the rubber hits the road. And it's better to have friends on the inside than just have your homies on the outside. But I digress. Let's continue here. It seems that the break in the army first appeared among the Cossacks, those age-old subduers and punishers. This does not mean, however, that the Cossacks were more revolutionary than others. On the contrary, these solid property owners, riding their own horses, highly valuing their Cossack peculiarities, scorning the plain peasants, mistrustful of the workers, had many elements of conservatism. But just for this reason, the changes caused by the war were more sharply noticeable in them. Besides, they were always being pulled around, sent everywhere, driven against the people, kept in suspense, and they were the first to be put to the test. They were sick of it and wanted to go home. Therefore, they winked. Do it, boys, if you know how. We won't bother you. Oh, that's so gangster. Oh, that's so gangster. Oh, my God. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. I'm turned up in this bitch. All these things, however, were merely very significant symptoms. The army was still the army. It was bound with discipline, and the threads were in the hands of the monarchy. The worker mass was unarmed. The leaders had not yet thought of the decisive crisis. Okay? Shout out to the Beebs up in the chat. He is our comrade now until he shows his colors, if he has other colors. If his colors are red, he gets to stay. But the Beebs said, I think all American cops are poorly trained, 18 weeks average. In my country, it takes years of training and lots of psychological / negotiation tactics. Yes, and also in America, our police forces do something peculiar that probably your nation doesn't do. My country actively recruits white supremacists. My country actively recruits neo-Nazis. My country actively recruits proto-fascists or full-on fascists to fill the many police forces that dot our nation. Literally, it's not a joke. It's not a conspiracy theory. There are gangs of neo-Nazis infiltrated in police departments as big as the Los Angeles Police Department. This is a known fact. Many of our police departments are filled with full-on KKK members, swastika tattoo having motherfuckers, which is why I don't understand stupid motherfuckers like Chud the Builder who want to run around calling black people the N-word. If you want to be a white supremacist in America, it's so easy. Just become a lawyer. Just become a cop. Just become a judge. Just become the president of the United States. You don't have to go around like a dumbass recording black people and then shoot yourself and get yourself a fucking murder charge. But I digress. Thank you to the Beebs. I'm not going to be digressing too much because this is a long chapter. Continuing. On the calendar of the Council of Ministers, the day there stood, among other questions, the question of disorders in the capital. Strikes, demonstrations, this isn't the first time. Everything is provided for. Directions have been issued. Return to the order of business. And what were the directions? In spite of the fact that on the 23rd and 24th, 28 policemen were beaten up. In spite of the fact that on the 23rd and 24th, 28 policemen were beaten up. Persuasive exactness about the number. The military commander of the district, General Kabalov, almost a dictator, did not resort to shooting. Not from kind-heartedness, everything was provided for and marked down in advance, even the time for the shooting. The revolution caught them unawares only with regard to the exact moment. Generally speaking, both sides, the revolutionary and the government, were carefully preparing for it, had been preparing for years, had always been preparing. As for the Bolsheviks, all their activity since 1905 was nothing but preparation for a second revolution. And the activities of the government, an enormous share of them, were preparations to put down the new revolution. In the fall of 1916, this part of the government's work had assumed an aspect of particularly careful planning. A commission under Kabalov's chairmanship had completed by the middle of January 1917 a very exact plan for crushing a new insurrection. The city was divided into 6 police districts, which in turn were subdivided into rayons. The command of the reserve guard units, General Chepkin, was placed at the head of all the armed forces. Regiments were assigned to different rayons. In each of the 6 police districts, the police, the gendarmes, and the troops were united under the command of special staff officers. The Cossack cavalry was at the disposal of Chepkin himself for large-scale operations. The order of action was planned as follows. First, the police act alone, then the Cossacks appear on the scene with whips, and only in case of real necessity, the troops go into action with rifles and machine guns. It was this very plan, developed out of the experience of 1905, that was put into operation in the February days. The difficulty lay not in lack of foresight, nor defects of the plan itself, but in the human material. Here, the whole thing threatened to hang fire. Okay, shout out to the Beebs up in the live stream. He says, my country has a political party that needed to be politely asked not to wear their SS uniforms to the meetings in recent history. Well, that's very vague. That's damn near every European country. Every European country has a Nazi underbelly. I repeat, every European country, even the ones that were allies, have a Nazi underbelly. The Nazis didn't go away. They just put on suits. So by that description, that could be France, Germany, Poland, Hungary, even Serbia. Fuck it. Okay. All right. Shout out to my guy, Kareth. He says, don't mean to distract you, but my guy looking like a black Republican on the golf course. Not hating though. I look like a black Republican right now. Listen, fellas. Bootstraps. Invest in your Roth IRA. Shout out to my guy Kamal. We gonna have a party in this motherfucker because a revolution just popped off in the text. Now I'm happy. Hey, all comments welcome. I'm loving this right now, man. I'm loving this right now. Continuing here. Formally, the plan was based on the entire garrison, which comprised 150,000 soldiers, but in reality, only some 10,000 came into the count. Besides the policemen, numbering 3,500, a firm hope was placed in the military training schools. This is explained by the makeup of the Petrograd garrison, which at that time consisted almost exclusively of reserve units, primarily of the 14 reserve battalions attached to the regiments of the Guard, which were then at the front. In addition to that, the garrison comprised one reserve infantry regiment, a reserve bicycle battalion. What? Niggas was shooting off the bikes? What? A reserve bicycle battalion, nigga? What? Y'all letting it ring off a Schwinn? Y'all niggas on the mongoose letting that fire go? Goddamn, boy. What the fuck? Hey, back then, any sort of mode of transportation that had wheels, they turned it into a military weapon. Niggas on a unicycle letting that fire go. Fa, fa, fa. Imagine getting hit by a motherfucker on a unicycle, on a bicycle. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, that just threw me off. That threw me off for real. In addition to that, the garrison comprised one reserve infantry regiment, a reserve bicycle battalion, a reserved armored car division, small units of sappers and artillerymen, and 2 regiments of Don Cossacks. That was a great many. It was too many. The swollen reserve units were made up of a human mass which had either escaped training almost entirely or succeeded in getting free of it. But for that matter, substantially the same thing was true of the entire army. Kabalov meticulously adhered to the plan he had worked out. On the first day, the 23rd, the police operated alone. On the 24th, for the most part, the cavalry was led into the streets, but only to work with whip and lance. The use of infantrymen and firearms was to depend on the further development of events. But events came thick and fast. Pause. Okay. Shout out to my guy Kamal. He said, damn, I actually applied to the Capitol Police a while back. Kamal, comrade, I know you would be a good Capitol Police, but you should have got in, man. We need some people on the inside. If you can't be a Capitol Police, join the Army. If you can't be in the Army, join the Marines, because they're dumb as hell. And I'm not saying you dumb, man. I'm just saying, we need some people on the inside. Be the spook who sat by the door. Go get that CIA training and bring it back to the trenches. You feel me? All right. Hey, the Beeb says I'm gonna summon the Dutch if I talk bad about bikes. That's crazy. That's crazy. Did y'all hear in the news recently? They ran up in some Dutch lady's house and they found a painting that was looted from a Jewish family by the Nazis. This is in the news. Go look it up. Type in Netherlands Nazi painting found in woman's home or something like that. Google it, man. This came out this week. I'm telling y'all, like I said earlier, the Nazis did not go underground. The Nazis went underground in Europe. Every European country has a Nazi underground. Anyway, on the 25th, the strike spread wider. According to the government's figures, 240,000 workers participated that day. The most backward layers are following up the vanguard. Already a good number of small establishments are on strike. The streetcars are at a stand. Business concerns are closed. In the course of the day, students of the higher schools joined the strike. By noon, tens of thousands of people poured to the Kazan Cathedral and the surrounding streets. Attempts are made to organize street meetings. A series of armed encounters with the police occurs. Orators address the crowds around the Alexander III monument. The mounted police open fire. A speaker falls wounded. Shots from the crowd kill a police inspector, wound the chief of police and several other policemen. Bottles, petards, and hand grenades are thrown at the gendarmes. The war has taught this art. The soldiers show indifference, at times hostility, to the police. It spreads excitedly through the crowd that when the police open fire by the Alexander III monument, the Cossacks let go a volley at the horse pharaohs. Such was the nickname of the police, and the latter had to gallop off. This apparently was not a legend circulated by self-encouragement, since the incident, although in different versions, is confirmed from several sources. A worker Bolshevik, Kayarov, one of the authentic leaders in those days, relates how, at one place, within the sight of a detachment of Cossacks, the demonstrators scattered under the whips of the mounted police, and how he, Kayarov, and several workers with him, instead of following the fugitives, took off their caps and approached the Cossacks with the words, "Brothers, Cossacks, help the workers in a struggle for their peaceful demands. You see how the pharaohs treat us. Hungry workers, help us." This consciously humble manner, those caps in their hands, what an accurate psychological calculation, inimitable gesture. The whole history of street fights and revolutionary victories swarm with such improvisations. But they are drowned without a trace in the abyss of great events. The shell remains to the historian, the generalization. The Cossacks glanced at each other in some special way. Kayarov continues, and we were hardly out of the way before they rushed into the fight. And a few minutes later, near the station gate, the crowd were tossing in their arms. A Cossack who before their eyes had slaughtered a police inspector with his saber. Damn, it got really bloody really quick. This is another thing. A revolutionary tactic is an appeal to people's sense of morality, right? Because what did the workers do? The workers came up to the Cossacks, who were the big, bad, tough guys. I would assume a comparison could be made that the Cossacks were the equivalent to the Proud Boys of our modern day. Our, right-wing fascist thugs that Donald Trump tells stand by, right? Those are the equivalent of the Cossacks, right? A paramilitary type force. And so what do the people do? They come up to these people who have also been abused by the state and tell them, listen, man, help us. We're just poor workers. And so a revolutionary tactic that we can use as a part of propaganda is an appeal to people's morality, their sense of justice, their sense of empathy, pity, etc. I digress. Soon, the police disappear altogether. That is, begin to act secretly. Then the soldiers appear, bayonets lowered. Anxiously, the workers ask them, "Comrades, you haven't come to help the police?" A rude, "Move along," for answers. Another attempt ends the same way. The soldiers are sullen. A worm is gnawing them, and they cannot stand it when a question hits the very center of the pain. Meanwhile, disarmament of the pharaohs becomes a universal slogan. The police are fierce, implacable, hated, and hating foes. To win them over is out of the question. Beat them up and kill them. It is different with the soldiers. The crowd makes every effort to avoid hostile encounters with them. On the contrary, seeks ways to dispose them in its favor. Convince, attract, fraternize, merge them in itself. In spite of the auspicious rumors about the Cossacks, perhaps slightly exaggerated, the crowd's attitude toward the mounted men remains cautious. A horseman sits high above the crowd. His soul is separated from the soul of the demonstrator by the four legs of his beast. A figure at which one must gaze from below always seems more significant, more threatening. The infantry are beside one on the pavement. On the pavement. Closer, more accessible. The masses try to get near them, look into their eyes, surround them with their hot breath. A great role is played by women workers in the relationship between workers and soldiers. They go up to the cordons more boldly than men, take hold of the rifles, beseech, almost command. Put down your bayonets and join us. Damn, those some gangster bitches. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's not very feminist of me, but damn, bitch, you gangster as fuck. She done grabbed that nigga's gun and said, put that motherfucker down. You coming with us. Damn. Russian women had that black woman energy. Just said, bitch. Damn, that's some gangster shit. Listen to that sentence, man. A great role is played by women workers in the relationship between workers and soldiers. They go up to the cordons more boldly than men, take hold of the rifles, beseech, almost command, put down your bayonets and join us. Motherfucker, damn. The soldiers are excited, ashamed, exchange anxious glances, waver. Someone makes up his mind first, and the bayonets rise guiltily above the shoulders of the advancing crowd. The barrier is opened. A joyous and grateful hurrah shakes the air. The soldiers are summoned. Everywhere, arguments, reproaches, appeals. The revolution makes another forward step. Another piece of commentary I have here. I know I said I wasn't going to do a lot, but this is why all of us cisgendered, heterosexual, males need to be feminist, because when the revolution pops off, it will not be successful without women. All people have something to contribute to our revolutionary cause, to overturn this society, to destroy this world and make one anew. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you face it, women are treated differently than men and viewed differently than men. So there are things that women can do that men can't do, and we should utilize that as a part of our revolutionary struggle. It's going to be much easier for a woman to punch a man in the face, you know what I mean, and get away with it, or walk up in danger and not be as threatened, you know what I mean, because they are a woman and perceived as a woman and the weaker sex, as some sexist people think, you know what I mean. That's what Ashley Babbitt was trying to do when the white supremacists sent their best. Ashley Babbitt thought her white womanhood was going to protect her from that bullet that knocked her ass back. And we're very glad Ashley Babbitt died. We celebrate every day that Ashley Babbitt is dead. The same way we celebrate that Chud the Builder shot himself and is now facing 60 years in jail. We celebrate the same way Charlie Kirk got clapped up. We celebrate that. But we also learn from our enemies, and our enemies definitely utilize women. Our enemies are full of sexist, patriarchal pigs. But we also know that they have no problem sending white women out to die for their stupid ass causes. You feel me? I digress. I'm going to be saying this a lot. I'm too turned. Nicholas from headquarters sends Kabalov a telegraphic command to put an end to the disorders tomorrow. The Tsar's will fell in with the next step in Kabalov's plan, and the telegram served merely as an extra stimulus. Tomorrow the troops will say their say. Isn't it too late? You can't tell yet. The question is posed, but far from answered. The indulgence of the Cossacks, the wavering of certain infantry lines, these are but much promising episodes repeated by the 1,000-voiced echo of the sensitive street, enough to inspire the revolutionary crowd, but too little for victory, especially since there are episodes of an opposite kind. In the afternoon, a detachment of dragoons, supposedly in response to revolver shots from the crowd, first opened fire on the demonstrators near Gostiny Dvor. According to Kabalov's report to headquarters, 3 were killed and 10 wounded, a serious warning. At the same time, Kabalov issued a threat that all workers registered in the draft would be sent to the front if they did not go to work before the 28th. The general issued a 3-day ultimatum. That is, he gave the revolution more time than it needed to overthrow Kabalov and the monarchy into the bargain. But that will become known only after the victory. On the evening of the 25th, nobody guessed what the next day had in its womb. Shout out to my guy Kamal in the chat. He says, great point. Hopefully he's talking about the feminist point, because I do think that we really need to be on the front lines of fighting against sexism and anti-feminism. As straight, heterosexual, cisgendered black men. You know what I mean? But I digress. Let us try to get a clearer idea of the inner logic of the movement. On February 23rd, under the flag of Women's Day, began the long-ripe and long-withheld uprising of the Petrograd working masses. The first step of the insurrection was the strike. In the course of 3 days, it broadened and became practically general. This alone gave assurance to the masses and carried them forward. Becoming more and more aggressive, the strike merged with the demonstrations, which were bringing the revolutionary mass face to face with the troops. This raised the problem as a whole to the higher level where things are solved by force of arms. The first days brought a number of individual successes, but these were more symptomatic than substantial. A revolutionary uprising that spreads over a number of days can develop victoriously only in case it ascends step by step and scores one success after another. A pause in its growth is dangerous, a prolonged marking of time, fatal. But even successes by themselves are not enough. The masses must know about them in time and have time to understand their value. It is possible to let slip a victory at the very moment when it is within arm's reach. This has happened in history. The first 3 days were days of uninterrupted increase in the extent and acuteness of the strife. But for this very reason, the movement had arrived at a level where mere symptomatic successes were not enough. The entire active mass of the people had come out on the streets. It was settling accounts with the police successfully and easily. In the last 2 days, the troops had been drawn into the events. On the second day, cavalry. On the third, the infantry too. They barred the way, pushed and crowded back the masses, sometimes connived with them, but almost never resorted to firearms. Those in command were slow to change their plan, partly because they underestimated what was happening. The faulty vision of the reaction supplemented that of the leaders of the revolution, partly because they lacked confidence in the troops. But exactly on the third day, the force of the developing struggle, as well as the Tsar's command, made it necessary for the government to send the troops into action in dead earnest. The workers understood this, especially their advanced ranks. The dragoons had already done some shooting the day before. Both sides now faced the issue unequivocally. All right? I'm sorry, I'm laughing for two reasons. I have a comment to say, but the Beebs says the killing of Ashley Babbitt's Wikipedia page was just removed. I wonder who did that. I wonder why they removed that. Maybe because it's so embarrassing, or maybe because they're going to whitewash it and put up Ashley Babbitt as a martyr because we're living in fascist America at the time. Second thing I have to say, I think a lot of us, especially in America, think revolution is impossible because we're so scared. We're terrified of our government. We're terrified of the right-wing militias that roam our lands, that train every single day for race war or holy war or class war against the working class people, etc., etc. But we have to think, right? If we do the proper antagonizing, if we do the proper propagandizing, if the conditions become so acute in strife and in difficulty for the people, more people will be on our side than on their side. Yes, there will be rivers of blood. Yes, there will be people that will get hurt in the struggle. But if the people have attained a level of consciousness about their condition, if the people have been pushed to the ledge, if the government is becoming weaker and weaker every single day because of the actions of the working class, the poor, and the dispossessed, who continue to antagonize for their rights, there will be more cops coming to our side. There will be more right-wing, former Proud Boys and Patriot Front members that will come to our side. We have to have the confidence to know that we are right in our struggle, and that more people will see that our interests are their interests as well, regardless of race, regardless of nationality, regardless of gender, regardless of position in society. You get what I'm saying? So we just have to remain that revolutionary hope and optimism. All right, continuing here. On the night of the 26th, about 100 people were arrested in different parts of the city, people belonging to various revolutionary organizations, and among them 5 members of the Petrograd Committee of the Bolsheviks. This also meant that the government was taking the offensive. What will happen today? In what mood will the workers wake up after yesterday's shooting? And most important, what will the troops say? The sun of February 26 came up in a fog of uncertainty and acute anxiety. In view of the arrest of the Petrograd Committee, the guidance of the entire work in the city fell into the hands of the Vyborg Rayon. Maybe this was just as well. The upper leadership in the party was hopelessly slow. Only on the morning of the 25th, the Bureau of the Bolshevik Central Committee at last decided to issue a handbill calling for an all-Russian general strike. At the moment of issue, if indeed it ever did issue, the general strike in Petrograd was facing an armed uprising. The leaders were watching the movement from above. They hesitated, they lagged. In other words, they did not lead. They dragged after the movement. The nearer one comes to the factories, the greater the decisiveness. Today, however, the 26th, there is an anxiety even in the rayons. Hungry, tired, chilled, with a mighty historic responsibility upon their shoulders, the Vyborg leaders gather outside the city limits, amid vegetable gardens, to exchange impressions of the day and plan the course. Of what? Of a new demonstration? But where will an unarmed demonstration lead, now that the government has decided to go the limit? This question bores into their minds. One thing seems evident. The insurrection is dissolving. Here we recognize the voice of Kayarov, already familiar to us, and at first it seems hardly his voice. The barometer falls so low before the storm. In the hours when hesitation seized even those revolutionists closest to the mass, the movement itself had gone much farther than its participants realized. The movement itself had gone much farther than its participants realized. Even the day before, toward evening of the 25th, the Viborg side was wholly in the hands of the insurrection. The police stations were wrecked. Individual officers had been killed, and the majority had fled. The city's headquarters had completely lost contact with the greater part of the capital. On the morning of the 26th, it became evident that not only the Viborg side, but also Pesky, almost up to Latini Prospect, was in control of the insurrection. At least, so the police reports defined the situation. And it was true in a sense, although the revolutionists could hardly realize it. The police in so many cases abandoned their lairs before there was any threat from the workers. The police in so many cases abandoned their lairs before there was any threat from the workers. But even aside from that, ridding the factory districts from the workers. I'm tripping. But even aside from that, ridding the factory districts of the police could not have decisive significance in the eyes of the workers. The troops had not yet said their final word. The uprising is dissolving, though the boldest of the bold. All right, I'm butchering stuff right now. I'm going in. The uprising is dissolving, thought the boldest of the bold. Meanwhile, it was only beginning to develop. All right. Shout out to Thomas Moore. How many men in the Trump family is in the military? 0. Facts. Yes, we need to send Barron. Send Barron to Iran. Send that tall, autistic serial killer of cats to Iran. He'll have a field day. If you've ever been to the Middle East, or Western Asia, as they call it now, those people love cats. And I heard Barron Trump likes to kill cats. Allegedly. There was a story that came out a few years ago where there was this black male nanny who was working with the Trump family. And he said, Barron likes to torture animals. You know what I mean? So Barron might have a great time in Iran. You know what I mean? Let him go fight that war. Let Barron Trump go fight that war. Allegedly, Barron Trump likes to kill cats. Continuing here. The 26th of February fell on a Sunday. The factories were closed, and this prevented measuring the strength of the mass pressure in terms of the extent of the strike. Moreover, the workers could not assemble in the factories as they had done on the preceding days, and that hindered the demonstrations. In the morning, the Nevsky was quiet. In those hours, the Tsarina telegraphed the Tsar, "The city is calm." But this calmness does not last long. The workers gradually concentrate and move from all suburbs to the center. They are stopped at the bridges. They flock across the ice. It is only February, and the Neva is one solid bridge of ice. The firing at their crowds on the ice is not enough to stop them. They find the city transformed. Posses, cordons, horse patrols everywhere. The approaches to the Nevsky are especially well guarded. Every now and then shots ring out from ambush. The number of killed and wounded grows. Ambulances dart here and there. You cannot always tell who is shooting and where the shots come from. One thing is certain. After their cruel lesson, the police have decided not to expose themselves again. They shoot from windows, through balcony doors, from behind columns, from attics. Hypotheses are formed, which easily become legends. They say that in order to intimidate the demonstrators, many soldiers are disguised in police uniforms. They say that Protopopov has placed numerous machine gun nests in the garrets of houses. A commission created after the revolution did not discover such nests, but this does not mean that there were none. However, the police on this day occupy a subordinate place. The troops come decisively into action. They are given strict orders to shoot, and the soldiers, mostly training squads, that is, non-commissioned officers' regimental schools, do shoot. According to the official figures, on this day, about 40 are killed and as many wounded, not counting those led or carried away by the crowd. The struggle arrives at a decisive stage. Will the mass ebb before the lead and flow back to its suburbs? No, it does not ebb. It is bound to have its own. So people were brave enough to even take those shots, man. All right, people were even brave enough to take those shots. Face gunfire, walking across ice water. Fire. All right. Shout out to Thomas More. You talking. Karl Marx. I understand. I have no idea what you're saying, Thomas More. I have no idea what you're saying. Anyway, bureaucratic bourgeois liberal Petersburg was in a fight. On that day, Rodzianko, the president of the State Duma, demanded that reliable troops be sent from the front. Later, he reconsidered and recommended to the war minister Belyaev that the crowds be dispersed, not with lead, but with the cold water of a fire hose. When I think of Rodzianko now, I just imagine Chuck Schumer. I think we could just we can replace Rodziansko's name in this text with Chuck Schumer, and we have the same character type. All right. Belyaev, having consulted General Kabalov, answered that a douse of water would produce precisely the opposite effect because it excites. Thus, in the liberal and bureaucratic upper circles, they discussed the relative advantages of hot and cold douches for the people in revolt. Police reports for that day testified that the fire hose was inadequate. In the course of the disorders, it was observed as a general phenomenon that the rioting mobs showed extreme defiance toward the military patrols, at whom, when asked to disperse, they threw stones and lumps of ice dug up from the street. When preliminary shots were fired into the air, the crowd not only did not disperse, but answered these volleys with laughter. Only when loaded cartridges were fired into the very midst of the crowd was it found possible to disperse the mob, the participants in which, however, would most of them hide in the yards of nearby houses, and as soon as the shooting stopped, come out again into the street. This police report shows that the temperature of the masses had risen very high. To be sure, it is hardly probable that the crowd would have begun of itself to bombard the troops, even the training squads, with stones and ice. That would, too, much contradict the psychology of the insurrectionary masses and the wise strategy they had shown with regard to the army. For the sake of supplementary justification for mass murders, the colors in the report are not exactly what they were, and are not laid on the way they were in actual fact. But the essentials are reported truly and with remarkable vividness. The masses will no longer retreat. They resist with optimistic brilliance. They stay on the street even after murderous volleys. They cling not to their lives, but to the pavement, to stones, to pieces of ice. The crowd is not only bitter, but audacious. This is because, in spite of the shooting, it keeps its faith in the army. It counts on victory and intends to have it at any cost. Wow. Powerful stuff. Okay? All right. Thomas More is saying, you don't know who Karl Marx is? I don't know, man. If I'm reading Trotsky, I guess I don't. I don't know who Marx is. I'm at this point where I'm reading a 1,000-page long Trotsky book, and I've never heard of Karl Marx. No, I haven't, Tom. I haven't, Tom. Sorry. The pressure of the workers upon the army is increasing, countering the pressure from the side of the authorities. The Petrograd garrison comes into the focus of events. The expectant period, which has lasted almost 3 days, during which it was possible for the main mass of the garrison to keep up friendly neutrality toward the insurrection, has come to an end. Shoot the enemy, the monarchy commands. Don't shoot your brothers and sisters, cry the workers. And not only that, come with us. Thus in the streets and squares, by the bridges, at the barrack gates, is waged a ceaseless struggle, now dramatic, now unnoticeable, but always a desperate struggle for the heart of the soldier. In this struggle, in these sharp contacts between working men and women and the soldiers, under the steady crackling of rifles and machine guns, the fate of the government, of the war, of the country is being decided. Wow. Wow. Powerful. Powerful stuff, man. That could be a movie. Imagine a movie like that. You know what I mean? The 3 days of the revolution. And we're at the point where, soldiers are like being told to shoot the people by the government. And the people are saying, come with us, brother. Come with us. Join us. I mean, how dramatic. I could see it vivid. The shooting of demonstrators increased the uncertainty among the leaders. The very scale of the movement began to seem dangerous. Even at the meetings of the Viborg Committee, the evening of the 26th, that is, 12 hours before the victory, arose discussions as to whether it was not time to end the strike. This may seem astonishing, but remember, it is far easier to recognize victory the day after than the day before. Besides, moods change frequently under the impact of events and the news of them. Discouragement quickly gives way to a flow of enthusiasm. Kolyarovs and Churgarins have plenty of personal courage, but at moments, a feeling of responsibility for the masses clutches them. Among the rank-and-file workers, there were fewer oscillations. Reports about their moods were made to the authorities by a well-informed agent in the Bolshevik organization, Shukharnov. Since the army units have not opposed the crowd, wrote the provocateur, and in individual cases have even taken measures paralyzing the initiative of the police officers, the masses have got a sense of impunity. And now, after 2 days of unobstructed walking the streets, when the revolutionary circles have advanced the slogans, "Down with war" and "Down with the autocracy," the people have become convinced that the revolution has begun, that success is with the masses, that the authorities are powerless to suppress the movement because the troops are with it, that a decisive victory is near, since the troops will soon openly join the side of the revolutionary forces, that the movement begun will not subside, but will ceaselessly grow to a complete victory and a state revolution. A characterization remarkable for compactness and clarity. The report is a most valuable historic document. This did not, of course, prevent the victorious workers from executing its author. Damn! Oh my God, Trotsky is such a dog with it. Trotsky is a dog with it. He said the government wrote a report saying like, yo, the people want revolution. They're trying to get the army to join their side. This is what is happening, right? And I believe he sent this to the Tsar. And so he wrote this all down. And when the workers finally bust through the gates, off with his head. Damn, Trotsky is such a fool with like those mic drop type sentences, man. Great work. Great writing. Great writing. Going to the comments, Carrot says, have you and your wife ever reviewed the movie Reds starring Warren Beatty? No, we haven't, but we should. There's a few socialist type movies that we need to review. We watched quite a lot of movies. We haven't watched Matterhorn yet. You suggested Matterhorn. We didn't get to it, but it will get done. All right. Thomas More says Karl Marx mobilized the masses of the common people. Yes, he did. So did many other revolutionaries after him. All right. And before there was Marx, there was Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines. True revolutionaries, we also need to add. Anyway. All right. Quick water break. Okay. All right. So these provocations, these provocateurs, whose number was enormous, especially in Petrograd, feared more than anyone else did the victory of the revolution. They followed a policy of their own. In the Bolshevik conferences, Shukharnov defended the most extreme actions. In his reports to the secret police, he suggested the necessity of a decisive resort to firearms. It is possible that with this aim, Shukharnov tried even to exaggerate the aggressive confidence of the workers, but in the main he was right. Events would soon confirm his judgment. The leaders in both camps guessed and vacillated, for not one of them could estimate a priori the relation of forces. External indications ceased absolutely to serve as a measure. Indeed, one of the chief features of a revolutionary crisis consists of the sharp contradiction between the present consciousness and the old forms of social relationship. A new relation of forces was mysteriously implanting itself in the consciousness of the workers and soldiers. It was precisely the government's offensive, called forth by the previous offensive of the revolutionary masses, which transformed the new relation of forces from a potential to an active state. The worker looked thirstily and commandingly into the eyes of the soldier, and the soldier anxiously and diffidently looked away. This meant that, in a way, the soldier could no longer answer for himself. The worker approached the soldier more boldly. The soldier sullenly, but without hostility, guiltily rather, refused to answer. Or sometimes, now more and more often, he answered with pretended severity in order to conceal how anxiously his heart was beating in his chest. Thus the change was accomplished. The soldier was clearly shaking off his soldiery. In doing so, he could not immediately recognize himself. The authorities said that the revolution intoxicated the soldier. To the soldier it seemed, on the contrary, that he was sobering up from the opium of the barracks. Let's read that again. I said that correctly, but we got to read that again. The authorities said that the revolution intoxicated the soldier. To the soldier it seemed, on the contrary, that he was sobering up from the opium of the barracks. Damn! Thus, the decisive day was prepared, the 27th of February. So what Trotsky is describing here is something we can only dream of. Something that gets me, just turned up. Imagine looking in the eyes of those police officers and those cops and saying, no, you listen to us now. You listen to the people. You know what I mean? Like right now, like our Gestapo, fascist, racist pigs that we have in America are brainwashed into thinking that their government is God, that this Constitution is the Bible. You know, like the way things are in America, is the way it should be, and they are meant to protect and serve. But they leave out the finer print that they are meant to protect and serve the rich, the ruling class, the billionaires, the property owners, not the people. Now imagine if we antagonize, propagandize to the point that we can look a police officer in the eye and say, put that gun down while we're unarmed, and the people are there. Think about that. That's inspo. That's inspo, man. That's what we're talking about. That's why we love this text right now. Yes, let's continue here. However, on the eve of that day, an incident occurred that, in spite of its episodic nature, paints with a new color all the events of the 26th. Toward evening, the 4th Company of the Pavlovsky Regiment of the Imperial Guard mutinied. In the written report of a police inspector, the cause of the mutiny is categorically stated: indignation against the training squad of the same regiment, which, while on duty in the Nevsky, fired on the crowd. Who informed the 4th Company of this? A record has been accidentally preserved. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a handful of workers ran up to the barracks of the Pavlovsky Regiment. Interrupting each other, they told about a shooting on the Nevsky. Tell your commands that the Pavlovsky, too, are shooting at us. We saw soldiers in your uniform on the Nevsky. That was a burning reproach, a flaming appeal. All looked distressed and pale. The seed fell not upon the rock. By 6 o'clock, the 4th Company had left the barracks without permission under the command of a non-commissioned officer. Who was he? His name is drowned forever among hundreds and thousands of equally heroic names, and marched to the Nevsky to recall its training squad. This was not a mere soldier's mutiny over wormy meat. It was an act of high revolutionary initiative. On their way down, the company had an encounter with a detachment of mounted police. The soldiers opened fire. 1 policeman and 1 horse were killed. Another policeman and another horse were wounded. The further path of the mutineers in the hurricane of the streets is unknown. The company returned to the barracks and aroused the entire regiment, but their arms had been hidden. According to some sources, they nevertheless got hold of 30 rifles. They were soon surrounded by the Petrograd. 19 Pavlovsky were arrested and imprisoned in the fortress. The rest surrendered. According to other information, the officers on that evening found 21 soldiers with rifles missing, a dangerous leak. These 21 soldiers would be seeking allies and defenders all night long. Only the victory of the revolution could save them. The workers would surely learn from them what had happened. This was not a bad omen for tomorrow's battles. Brave. That's another thing. We're going to have to count on the bravery of some people on the inside to mutiny. That's the thing. Once again, what I'm taking from this chapter is that, yes, policing as it is done creates bastards. But all cops are not bastards. They're just misguided working class people who have to be antagonized and propagandized to and broken out of their shell that's been put on their mind over the years of American propaganda that tells them that cops are the good guys and do anything to maintain law and order rather than the rights of the people. We have to break that shell on the police's mind to get them on our side, and we'll also have to count on some type of bravery on their part to do what is right on behalf of the people. Continuing here. Nabokov, one of the most prominent liberal leaders, whose truthful memoirs seem at times to be the very diary of his party and of his class, was returning home from a visit at 1 o'clock in the morning along the dark and watchful streets. He was perturbed and filled with dark forebodings. It is possible that at one of the crossings he met a fugitive Pavlovets. Both hurried past. They had nothing to say to each other. In the workers' quarters and the barracks, some kept watch or conferred. Others slept the half-sleep of the bivouac, or dreamed feverishly about tomorrow. Here, the fugitive Pavlovets found shelter. Okay. All right. Shout out to Christine Sherman up in the live stream. I don't know what Christine is saying. I have no idea what Christine is saying. I don't know what Thomas Moore is saying. Okay, I guess into only one track. I tried to open away. I don't know. All right. I don't know what you're saying, Thomas Moore. You're going to have to format your text better. Going to have to format your text better. Or we might have to send you to the re-education camp. The re-education camp is timeout in YouTube terms. And disrespect will get you sent to the gulag. So make your choice wisely. Format better, comrade. Format better. All right. So, how scant are the records of the mass fighting in the February days? Scant even in comparison with the slim records of the October fights. In October, the party directed the insurrection from day to day. In its articles, proclamations, and reports, at least the external continuity of the struggle is recorded. Not so in February. The masses had almost no leadership from above. The newspapers were silenced by the strike. Without a look back, the masses made their own history. To reconstruct a living picture of the things that happened in the streets is almost unthinkable. It would be well if we could recreate at least the general continuity and inner order of events. The government, which had not yet lost hold of the machinery of power, observed the events on the whole even less ably than the left parties, which, as we know, were far from brilliant in this direction. After the successful shootings of the 26th, the ministers took heart for an instant. At dawn of the 27th, Protopopov reassuringly reported that, according to information received, part of the workers intend to return to work. But the workers never thought of going back to the shops. Yesterday's shootings and failures had not discouraged the masses. How explain this? Apparently, the losses were outbalanced by certain gains. Pouring through the streets, colliding with the enemy, pulling at the arm of soldiers, crawling under horses' bellies, attacking, scattering, leaving their corpses on the crossings, grabbing a few firearms, spreading the news, catching at rumors, the insurrectionary mass became a collective entity with numberless eyes, ears, and antennae. At night, returning home from the arena of struggle to the workers' quarter, it goes over the impressions of the day, and sifting away what is petty and accidental, casts its own thoughtful balance. On the night of the 27th, the balance was practically identical with the report made to the authorities by the provocateur Shukarnov. So basically what Trotsky is saying here, everything that happened, on those fateful days of the revolution when it actually popped off on the 23rd, right? After the successful shootings of from the 23rd to the 27th, right? Everything that happened in that week's long time, it's hard to really narrate, right? Because so much of it was in the actual moment. You know what I mean? It was sort of like mob justice, the people come alive, the people take over the streets, and to describe everything that happened would be impossible because there's millions of narratives that were recorded and millions more that probably were not recorded, right? That happened that day. So he's basically trying his best to say this is a brief summary of what happened, during that time. All right. Thomas Moore says, you were giving me ammunition. I can't use ammunition with faulty bullets or faulty guns. I can't. If you're going to format and tell me something, it has to be formatted correctly so we can understand it, my guy. And then we can fire it off. All right? But that's your choice. In the morning, the workers streamed again to the factories, and in open meetings resolved to continue the struggle. Especially resolute, as always, were the Vyabortsky. But in other districts, too, these morning meetings were enthusiastic to continue the struggle. But what would that mean today? The general strike had issued in revolutionary demonstrations by immense crowds, and the demonstrations had led to a collision with the troops. To continue the struggle today would mean to summon an armed insurrection. But nobody had formulated this summons. It had grown irresistibly out of the events, but it was never placed on the order of the day by a revolutionary party. The art of revolutionary leadership in its most critical moments consists 9/10 in knowing how to sense the mood of the masses, just as Kayarov detected the movement of the Cossack's eyebrow, though on a larger scale. An unexcelled ability to detect the mood of the masses was Lenin's great power. But Lenin was not in Petrograd. The legal and semi-legal socialistic staffs, Kerensky, Tsarist, Skobelev, and all those who circled around them, pronounced warnings and opposed the movement. But even the central Bolshevik staff, composed of Shilapivnok, Zalutsky, and Molotov, was amazing in its helplessness and lack of initiative. In fact, the districts and barracks were left to themselves. The first proclamation to the army was released only on the 26th by one of the social democratic organizations close to the Bolsheviks. So that's a profound statement he's saying right here. That's a profound statement Trotsky is saying right here. He is saying that the leading communists who were in Russia at the time were not involved in the beginning of the revolution. When the revolution did pop off, it wasn't the communists leading the front. It wasn't the socialists leading the front. It was the people saying they had enough. And more importantly, it was the most oppressed people in that society, at least in Trotsky's view, the women who were working in factories, the textile workers, people that probably got paid pennies on the ruble. Pennies on the ruble, worked long shifts, and were also expected to do women's work while at home. The most disrespected people, the most marginalized people in that society kicked it off without communists leading them, without socialist eggheads leading them. What does that say? What does that say about the movement? And what does that say generally? Because this is a lesson to be learned from socialist parties or socialists who are organizing today. What does it say that when the Bolshevik Revolution, what we call the Bolshevik Revolution, popped off, it was really the Bolsheviks who were saying, no, guys, it's not the time. It's not the time yet. Don't do it. They were opposed to the beginning of their own revolution. What does that say? I digress. So, this proclamation, rather hesitant in character, not even containing an appeal to come over to the people, was distributed throughout all the city districts on the morning of the 27th. However, testifies Uranev, the leader of the organization, the tempo of the revolutionary events was such that our slogans were already lagging behind it. By the time the leaflets had penetrated into the thick of the troops, the latter had already come over. As for the Bolshevik center, Shilapnikov, at the demand of Chugarin, one of the best worker leaders of the February days, finally wrote an appeal to the soldiers on the morning of the 27th. Was it ever published? At best, it might have come in at the finish. It could not possibly have influenced the events of February 27th. We must lay it down as a general rule for those days that the higher the leaders, the further they lagged behind. Now that's a lesson. I know we've been ranking on the bourgeoisie and the capitalist class and our evil pedophile billionaires, but let this be a lesson to all of us socialists, man. Sometimes we can be separated from the people. Sometimes we can be disengaged with actually the grassroots. And this is something that we should always keep in mind. This is one of the most profound lessons from Trotsky's book. The Bolsheviks came late. The people were right on time. The revolution was not memorized. The revolution was not memorized. You know what I mean? Meaning, it wasn't done by a bunch of intellectuals who said, this is how it's going to go down. This will be the time. The intellectuals don't know the time. The marginalized, the oppressed, the dispossessed know the time. And only they control the time. Facts. Facts. Real shit. But the insurrection, not yet so named by anyone, took its own place on the order of the day. All the thoughts of the workers were concentrated on the army. Don't you think we can get them started? Today, haphazard agitation would no longer do. The Vyborg section staged a meeting near the barracks of the Moscow regiment. The enterprise proved a failure. Is it difficult for some officer or sergeant major to work the handle of a machine gun? The workers were scattered by cruel fire. A similar attempt was made at the barracks of a reserve regiment. And there too, officers with machine guns interfered between the workers and soldiers. The leaders of the workers fumed, looked for firearms, demanded them from the party. And the answer was, the soldiers have the firearms, go get them. That they knew themselves. but how to get them? Isn't everything going to collapse all at once today? Thus came on the critical point of the struggle. Either the machine gun will wipe out the insurrection, or the insurrection will capture the machine gun. In his recollections, Shelipnikov, the chief figure of the Petrograd center of the Bolsheviks, tells how he refused the demands of the workers for firearms, or even revolvers, sending them to the barracks to get them. He wished in this way to avoid bloody clashes between workers and soldiers, staking everything on agitation. That is on the conquest of the soldiers by work and example. We know of no other testimony that confirms or refutes this statement of a prominent leader of those days, a statement which testifies to sidestepping rather than foresight. It would be simpler to confess that the leaders had no firearms. Okay. There is no doubt that the fate of every revolution at a certain point is decided by a break in the disposition of the army against a numerous, disciplined, well-armed, and ably led military force. Unarmed or almost unarmed masses of the people cannot possibly gain a victory, but no deep national crisis can fail to affect the army to some extent. Thus, along with the conditions of a truly popular revolution, there develops a possibility, not, of course, a guarantee, of its victory. However, the going over of the army to the insurrection does not happen of itself, nor as a result of mere agitation. The army is heterogeneous, and its antagonistic elements are held together by the terror of discipline. On the very eve of the decisive hour, the revolutionary soldiers do not know how much power they have, or what influence they can exert. The working masses, of course, are also heterogeneous, but they have immeasurably more opportunity for testing their ranks in the process of preparation for the decisive encounter. Strikes, meetings, demonstrations are not only acts in the struggle, but also measures of its force. Profound. Listen to that. He's saying that, listen, the army is strong. They got guns, they got tanks, they got bad Israeli, women that twerk on TikTok, all meant to distract you. You get what I'm saying? The army got some shit that we can't go up against. But what do the workers have? They have practice. They have strikes. They have demonstrations. You know what I mean? They go out in the streets. And this is a practice to show how workers can organize and defend themselves and resist the armed force of the state, and also measure its own talent and force. That's what Trotsky is saying right here. That's so dope. That's absolutely so dope. So profound. Let's read that again. The working masses, of course, are also heterogeneous, but they have immeasurably more opportunity for testing their ranks in the process of preparation for the decisive encounter. Strikes, meetings, demonstrations are not only acts in the struggle, but also measures of its force. The whole mass does not participate in the strike. Not all the strikers are ready to fight. In the sharpest moments, the most daring appear in the streets. The hesitant, the tired, the conservative sit at home. Here, a revolutionary selection takes place of itself. People are sifted through the sieve of events. It is otherwise with the army. The revolutionary soldiers, sympathetic, wavering, or antagonistic, are all tied together by a compulsory discipline whose threads are held, up to the last moment, in the officers' fists. The soldiers are told off daily into first and second files, but how are they to be divided into rebellious and obedient? Damn, bro. Dog, he is spitting right here. So what he's saying is, like, workers, they get tested, they get put through fire. They go by trials by fire. If you're a worker and you're revolutionary and you're outside with it, you're going to be like, okay, this shit is not for me. I don't want to get hit with billy clubs or shot in the eye with rubber bullets. I'm going to sit my ass at home and just do propaganda work. I'll just do some desk work for the party. Meanwhile, soldiers get chewed out every single day. They get cussed out and spit on by their majors and sergeants and shit like that. They gotta march every single day. And a lot of people are in the army, not really for some idealism, for nationalist beliefs. They're in it just for the check. They're in it just because they can't get a job. Facts. You ever known anybody in the U.S. Army? Half of them there were just in it for a Hellcat. Half of them in it were just in it for a Hellcat. And to go to Hawaii. That's it. That is it. That's the reason why many people join the army. And Trotsky lays it out here. There's going to be an element of the army that wants to sympathize with the people. The soldiers are told off daily into first and second files. But how are they to be divided into rebellious and obedient? You can't guarantee an obedient army, because most of the time the army are essentially nationalistic mercenaries. Essentially, most armies are just nationalistic mercenaries. Yeah, I love my country, but I really want a Dodge Charger. That's really what it is. Yeah, I love America, but I really want that Hellcat. That's really what it is, bro. Why people join the fucking army. And if push came to shove, a lot of them would leave. A lot of them would jump ship. Especially if the people are organized and the people are under pressure. But I digress. Let's continue. The psychological moment when the soldiers go over to the revolution is prepared by a long molecular process, which, like other processes of nature, has its point of climax. But how to determine this point? A military unit may be wholly prepared to join the people, but may not receive the needed stimulus. The revolutionary leadership does not yet believe in the possibility of having the army on its side, and lets slip the victory. After this ripened but unrealized mutiny, a reaction may seize the army. The soldiers lose the hope which flared in its breast. They bend their necks again to the yoke of discipline, and in a new encounter with the workers, especially at a distance, will stand opposed to the insurrection. In this process, there are many elements imponderable or difficult to weigh, many cross-currents, collective suggestions, and auto-suggestions. But out of this complicated web of material and psychic forces, one conclusion emerges with irrefutable clarity. The more the soldiers in their mass are convinced that the rebels are really rebelling, that this is not a demonstration after which they will have to go back to the barracks and report, that this is a struggle to the death, that the people may win if they join them, that this winning will not only guarantee impunity, but alleviate the lot of all, the more they realize this, the more willing they are to turn aside their bayonets or go over with them to the people. In other words, the revolutionists can create a break in the soldiers' mood only if they themselves are actually ready to seize the victory at any price whatever, even the price of blood. And the highest determination never can or will remain unarmed. Wow. I mean, I just want to rant about that real quick. I was thinking a lot about this point. He's saying here that, the soldiers, if they feel like they're willing to mutiny against the army, they're willing to risk their lives to, basically commit, treason, what I mean, against the state. If they're willing to do that, the people have to be ready to accept them and also be willing to utilize their skills quickly. The people have to be very quick in this. This can't be just waiting around and stuff like that. You have to let that fervor get high and keep it high. Temperature has to stay high. And so it makes me think about this. Right now, our enemies are just right-wing ideologues who are, very dangerous. They are very dangerous, but I believe a lot of them are very, very dangerous and hostile to our side. It's because they think that we will not accept them, that we will not actually let them come join the opposition, that we're always going to judge them because in the past they were racist, they were sexist, etc., etc. And it makes me think about Graham Plattner. There's this guy running for Senate in Maine, and he has like a Totenkopf, like a Nazi symbol tattoo that he got when he was a mercenary for Blackwater, sent across seas to go murder brown people on behalf of the U.S. government. And our tax dollars, let us never forget that, our tax dollars paid for these mercenary companies to murder people. And these are the same people that we say they're patriotic Americans. Get the fuck out of here. Anyway. So Graham Plattner has been criticized because of his Nazi tattoo, but also his affiliation with Blackwater and special forces and things like that. But the thing is, right, while he is just trying to be a liberal politician and most likely just trying to get a job with a good pension, to deal with his PTSD so he can get therapy for life. The point is, people like Graham Plattner have to know that there's an accepting left that will criticize them for their past actions, but also let them know that now they're on this side, and that's going to be put to the side for right now. And like, Trotsky said, we're going to guarantee impunity and alleviate the lot of all. I think to a certain point, we have to be willing to accept some right-wingers to defect to our side. And that might be a controversial point. I guess the question is, at what point in the revolution is Nick Fuentes still accepted on this side? Is it when we're at the White House doors and he's barricaded inside with Tucker Carlson and all the other elite Epstein pedophiles and stuff like that? Or, is it right now? If Nick Fuentes, abandoned his racist beliefs right now, would we accept him on the left? I don't know. But I'll continue here. The critical hour of contact between the pushing crowd and the soldiers who bar their way has its critical minute. That is when the gray barrier has not yet given way, still holds together shoulder to shoulder, but already wavers, and the officer, gathering his last strength of will, gives the command, fire. The cry of the crowd, the yell of terror and threat, drowns the command, but not wholly. The rifles waver. The crowd pushes. Then the officer points the barrel of his revolver at the most suspicious soldier. From the decisive minute now stands out the decisive second. The death of the boldest soldier, to whom the others have involuntarily looked for guidance. A shot into the crowd by a corporal from the dead man's rifle. And the barrier closes. The guns go off themselves, scattering the crowd into the alley and backyards. By how many times since 1905 it has happened otherwise? At the critical moment when the officer is ready to pull the trigger, a shot from the crowd, which has its Kolyarovs and Chugurins, forestalls him. This decides not only the fate of the street skirmish, but perhaps the whole day or the whole insurrection. Damn, Trotsky was making fucking screenplays. Sounded like a screenplay. That sounds like some Hollywood-ish. Jesus. Did he watch a lot of movies? I feel like Trotsky watched tons of movies. But I don't think movies back then were that dramatic. God damn. The task which Shelipnikov set himself of protecting the workers from hostile clashes with the troops by not giving firearms to the insurrectionists could not in any case be carried out. But it came to these clashes with the troops. Innumerable clashes had occurred with the police. The street fighting began with the disarming of the hated pharaohs, their revolvers passing into the hands of the rebels. The revolver by itself is a weak, almost toy-like weapon against the muskets, rifles, machine guns, and cannon of the enemy. But are these weapons genuinely in the hands of the enemy? To settle this question, the workers demanded arms. It was a psychological question, but even in an insurrection, psychic processes are inseparable from material ones. The way to the soldier's rifle leads through the revolver, taken from the pharaoh. The feelings of the soldiers in those hours were less active than those of the workers, but not less deep. Let us recall again that the garrison consisted mainly of reserve battalions, many thousands strong, destined to fill up the ranks of those at the front. These men, most of them fathers of families, had the prospect of going to the trenches when the war was lost and the country ruined. They did not want war. They wanted to go home to their farms. They knew well enough what was going on at court and had not the slightest feeling of attachment to the monarchy. They did not want to fight with the Germans, and still less with the Petrograd workers. They hated the ruling class of the capital, who had been having a good time during the war. Among them were workers with a revolutionary past, who knew how to give a generalized expression to all these moods, to bring the soldiers from a deep but as yet hidden revolutionary discontent to overt mutinous action, or at least first to mutinous refusal to act. That was the task. On the third day of the struggle, the soldiers totally ceased to be able to maintain a benevolent neutrality toward the insurrection. Only accidental fragments of what happened in those hours along the line of contact between workers and soldiers have come down to us. We heard how yesterday the workers complained passionately to the Pavlovsky regiment about the behavior of its training squad. Such scenes, conversations, reproaches, appeals were occurring in every corner of the city. The soldiers had no more time for hesitation. They were compelled to shoot yesterday, and they would be again today. The workers will not surrender or retreat. Under fire, they are still holding their own, and with them their women, wives, mothers, sisters, sweethearts. Yes, and this is the very hour they had so often whispered about. If only we could all get together. And in the moment of supreme agony, in the unbearable fear of the coming day, the choking hatred of those who are imposing upon them the executioner's role, there ring out in the barrack room the first voices of open indignation. And in those voices, to be forever nameless, the whole army with relief and rapture recognizes itself. Thus dawned upon the earth the day of destruction of the Romanov monarchy. Man, this is epic. This is epic shit. At a morning conference in the home of the indefatigable Kayarov, who over 40 shop and factory representatives had assembled, at a morning conference in the home of the indefatigable Kayarov, where over 40 shop and factory representatives had assembled, a majority spoke for continuing the movement. A majority, but not all. Too bad we cannot establish what majority, but in those hours there was no time for records. Anyway, the decision was belated. The meeting was interrupted by the intoxicating news of the soldiers' insurrection and the opening of the jails. Shukarnov kissed all those present. A kiss of Judas, but not fortunately to be followed by a crucifixion. One after another, from early morning, the reserve guard battalions mutinied before they were led out of the barracks, continuing what the 4th Company of the Pavlovsky Regiment had begun the day before. In the documents, records, memoirs, this grandiose event of human history has left but a pale, dim imprint. The oppressed masses, even when they rise to the very height of creative action, tell little of themselves and write less, and the overpowering rapture of the victory later erases the memory's work. Let us take up what records there are. The soldiers of the Volninsky Regiment were the first to revolt. As early as 7 o'clock in the morning, a battalion commander disturbed Kabalov with a telephone call and this threatening news. The training squad, that is, the unit especially relied on to put down the insurrection, had refused to march out. Its commander was killed or had shot himself in front of the troops. The latter version, by the way, was soon rejected. Having burned their bridges behind them, the Volninsky hastened to broaden the base of the insurrection. In that lay their only salvation. They rushed into the neighboring barracks of the Litovsky and Preobrazhensky regiments, calling out the soldiers, as strikers go from factory to factory, calling out the workers. Sometime after, Kabalov received a report that the Volninsky regiment had not only refused to surrender their rifles when ordered by the general, but together with the Litovsky and Preobrazhensky regiments, and what is even more alarming, having joined the workers, had wrecked the barracks of the political police. This meant that yesterday's experiment of the Pavlovsky had not been in vain. The insurrection had found leaders and at the same time a plan of action. Shout out to Maya Hana Kodesh up in the chat. Shalom to you. Shalom to you. And peace to all our Jewish brothers and sisters. In the early hours of the 27th, the workers thought the solution of the problem of the insurrection infinitely more distant than it really was. It would be truer to say that they saw the problem as almost entirely ahead of them, when it was really 9/10 behind. The revolutionary pressure of the workers on the barracks fell in with the existing revolutionary movement of the soldiers to the streets. During the days, these two mighty currents united to wash out clean and carry away the walls, the roof, and later the whole groundwork of the old structure. Chugarin was among the first to appear at the Bolshevik headquarters, a rifle in his hand, a cartridge belt over his shoulder, all spattered up, but beaming and triumphant. Why shouldn't he beam? Soldiers with rifles in their hands are coming over to us. In some places, the workers have succeeded in uniting with the soldiers, penetrating the barracks, and receiving rifles and cartridges. The Vierborgst, together with the most daring of the soldiers, outlined a plan of action. Seize the police stations where the armed police have entrenched themselves. Disarm all policemen. Free the workers held in the police stations and the political prisoners in the jails. Rout the government troops in the city proper. Unite with the still inactive troops and with the workers of other districts. The Moscow regiment joined the uprising, not without inner struggle. Amazing that there was so little struggle among the regiments. The monarchist command impotently fell away from the soldier mass and either hid in the cracks or hastened to change its color. At 2 o'clock, remembers Korolev, a worker from the arsenal factory, when the Moscow regiment marched out, we armed ourselves. We took a revolver and rifle apiece, picked out a group of soldiers who came up. Some of them asked us to take command and tell them what to do, and set out for Tyavinskaya Street to shoot up the police station. We were marching with our boys to go shoot up the police station. The workers, it seems, did not have a moment's trouble telling the soldiers what to do. One after another came the joyful reports of victories. Our own armored cars have appeared, with red flags flying. They are spreading terror through the districts to all who have not yet submitted. Now it will no longer be necessary to crawl under the belly of a Cossack's horse. The revolution is standing up to its full height. Toward noon, Petrograd again became the field of military action. Rifles and machine guns rang out everywhere. It was not easy to tell who was shooting or where. One thing was clear: the past and the future were exchanging shots. There was much casual firing. Young boys were shooting off revolvers unexpectedly acquired. The arsenal was wrecked. They say that several tens of thousands of Brownlings alone were carried off. From the burning buildings of the district court and the police station's pillars of smoke rolled to the sky. At some point, clashes and skirmishes thickened into real battles. On Sempiolskievsky Boulevard, the workers came up to a barrack occupied by the bicycle men, some of whom crowded into the gate. "Why don't you get on the move, comrades?" The soldiers smiled. Not a good smile. One of the participants testified and remained silent while the officers rudely commanded the workers to move on. The bicyclists, along with the cavalry, proved to be the most conservative part of the army in the February, as in the October Revolution. A crowd of workers and revolutionary soldiers soon gathered round the fence. "We must pull out the suspicious battalion." Someone reported that the armored cars had been sent for. Perhaps there was no other way of getting these bicyclists, who had set up the machine guns, but it is hard for a crowd to wait. It is anxiously impatient, and quite right in its impatience. Shots rang out from both sides, but the board fence stood in the way, dividing the soldiers from the revolution. The attackers decided to break down the fence. They broke down part of it and set fire to the rest. About 20 barracks came into view. The bicyclists were concentrated in 2 or 3 of them. The empty barracks were set fire to at once. 6 years later, Kayarov would recall the flaming barracks and the wreckage of the fence around them, the fire of machine guns and rifles, the excited faces of the besiegers, a truckload of armed revolutionists dashing up, and finally an armored car arriving with its gleaming gun mouths made a memorable and magnificent picture. This was the old Tsarist, feudal, priestly, police Russia burning down, barracks and fences and all, expiring in fire and smoke, spewing out its soul with the hiccough of machine gun shots. No wonder Kayarov and tens of hundreds, thousands of Kayarovs rejoiced. The arriving armored car fired several shells. The arriving armored car fired several shells at the barrack where the bicyclists and officers were barricaded. The commander was killed. The officers, tearing off their epaulettes and other insignia, fled through the vegetable gardens adjoining the barracks. The rest gave themselves up. This was probably the biggest encounter of the day. The military revolt had meanwhile become epidemic. Only those did not mutiny that day who did not get around to it. Toward evening, the Semenovsky regiment joined in, a regiment notorious for its brutal putting down of the Moscow uprisings of 1905. 11 years had not passed in vain. Together with the chasseurs, the Semenovsky, late at night, called out the Ismailovitsky, whom the command was holding locked up in their barracks. This regiment, which on December 3, 1905, had surrounded and arrested the first Petrograd Soviet, was even now considered one of the most backward. The Tsarist garrison of the capital, numbering 150,000 soldiers, was dwindling, melting, disappearing. By night, it no longer existed. After the morning's news of the revolt of the regiments, Kabalov still tried to offer resistance, sending against the revolution a composite regiment of about 1,000 men with the most drastic orders. But the fate of that regiment has become quite a mystery. Something impossible begins to happen on that day. The incomparable Kabalov relates, after the revolution, the regiment starts under a resolute officer, meaning Colonel Kutayepov, but there are no results. Companies sent after that regiment also vanished, leaving no trace. The general began to draw up reserves on Palace Square, but there were no cartridges and nowhere to get them. This is taken from Kabalov's authentic testimony before the Commission of Inquiry of the Provisional Government. What became of the punitive regiments? It is not hard to guess that as soon as they marched out, they were drowned in the insurrection. Workers, women, youth, rebel soldiers swarmed around Kabalov's troops on all sides, either considering the regiment their own or striving to make it so, and did not let them move any way but with the multitude. To fight with this thick, swarming, inexhaustible, all-penetrating mass, which now feared nothing, was as easy as to fence in dough. That's crazy. The revolution's fervor was so high, people just surrounded the police and said, "You coming with us? Hey, we going to take over the Capitol. You coming along, bruh? No, ain't no getting out this car." That's crazy. That's crazy. Together with reports of more and more military revolts, came demands for reliable troops to put down the rebels, to defend the telephone building, the Trotsky castle, the Mariinsky palace, and other even more sacred places. Kabalov demanded by telephone that loyal troops be sent from Kronstadt, but the commandant replied that he himself feared for the fortress. Kabalov did not yet know that the insurrection had spread to the neighboring garrisons. The general attempted, or pretended to attempt, to convert the Winter Palace into a redoubt, but the plan was immediately abandoned as unrealizable, and the last handful of loyal troops was transferred to the Admiralty. Here, at last, the dictator occupied himself with a most important and urgent business. He printed for publication the last two governmental decrees on the retirement of Protopopov owing to illness, and on the state of siege in Petrograd. With the latter, he really had to hurry, for several hours later, Kabalov's army lifted the siege and departed from the Admiralty for their homes. It was due only to ignorance that the revolution had not already, on the evening of the 27th, arrested this formidably empowered but not at all formidable general. This was done without any complications the next day. Can it be that was the whole resistance put up by the redoubtable Russian Empire in the face of mortal danger? Yes, that was about all. In spite of its great experience in crushing the people and its meticulously elaborated plans, when they came to themselves later, the monarchists explained the ease of the February victory of the people by the peculiar character of the Petrograd garrison. But the whole further course of the revolution refutes this explanation. True, at the beginning of the fatal year, the Camarilla had already suggested to the Tsar the advisability of renovating the garrison. The Tsar had easily allowed himself to be persuaded that the cavalry of the guard, considered especially loyal, had been under fire long enough and had earned a rest in his Petrograd barracks. However, after respectful representations from the front, the Tsar agreed that 4 regiments of the cavalry guard should be replaced by 3 crews of the naval guard. According to Protopopov's version, this replacement was made by the command without the Tsar's consent. With treacherous design. The sailors are recruited from among the workers and constitute the most revolutionary elements of the forces. But this is sheer nonsense. The highest officers of the guard, and particularly the cavalry, were simply cutting out too good a career for themselves at the front to want to come back. Besides that, they must have thought with some dread of the punitive functions to be allotted to them. In these, they would be at the head of troops totally different after their experience at the front from what they used to be on the parade grounds of the capital. As events at the front soon proved, the horse guard at this time no longer differed from the rest of the cavalry, and the naval guard, which was transferred to the capital, did not play an active part in the February Revolution. The whole truth is that the fabric of the regime had completely decayed. There was not a live thread left. During the 27th of February, the crowd liberated, without bloodshed, from the many jails of the capital, all political prisoners, among them the patriotic group of the Military Industrial Committee, which had been arrested on the 26th of January, and the members of the Petrograd Committee of the Bolsheviks, seized by Kabalov 40 hours earlier. A political division occurred immediately outside the prison gates. The Menshevik patriots set out for the Duma, where functions and places were to be assigned. The Bolsheviks marched to the districts, to the workers and soldiers, to finish with them the conquest of the capital. The enemy must have no time to breathe. A revolution, more than any other enterprise, has to be carried through to the end. It is impossible to say who thought of leading the mutinous troops to the Tauride Palace. This political line of march was dictated by the whole situation. Naturally, all the elements of radicalism not bound up with the masses gravitated toward the Tauride Palace as the center of oppositional information. Quite probably these elements, having experienced on the 27th a sudden injection of vital force, became the guides of the mutinous soldiers. This was an honorable role and now hardly a dangerous one. In view of its location, Potemkin's palace was well fitted to be the center of the revolution. The Tauride Park is separated by just one street from the whole military community, containing the barracks of the guard and a series of military institutions. It is true that for many years this part of the city was considered both by the government and the revolutionists to be the military stronghold of the monarchy, and so it was. But now everything had changed. The soldiers' rebellion had begun in the guard sector. The mutinous troops had only to cross the street in order to reach the park of the Tauride Palace, which in turn was only 1 block from the Neva River. And beyond the Neva lies the Vyborg district, the very cauldron of the revolution. The workers need only cross Alexander's Bridge, or if that is up, walk over the ice of the bridge to reach the guards' barracks on the Tauride Palace. To reach the guards' barracks or the Tauride Palace. Thus, the heterogeneous and in its origins contradictory northeast triangle of Petrograd, the guards, Potemkin's palace, and the giant factories, closely interlocked, became the field of action of the revolution. In the Tauride Palace, various centers are already created, or at least sketched out. Among them, the field staff of the insurrection. It has no very serious character. The revolutionary officers, that is, those officers who had somehow or other, even though by mistake, got connected with the revolution in the past, but who have safely slept through the insurrection, hasten after the victory to call attention to themselves, or upon summons from others arrive to serve the revolution. They survey the situation with profound thought and pessimistically shake their heads. These tumultuous crowds of soldiers, often unarmed, are totally unfit for battle. No artillery, no machine guns, no communications, no commanders. One strong regiment is all the enemy needs. To be sure, just now the revolutionary crowds prevent any planned maneuvers in the streets, but the workers will go home for the night. The residents will quiet down. The town will be emptied. If Kabalov were to strike with a strong regiment at the barracks, he might become master of the situation. This idea, by the way, will meet us in different versions throughout all the stages of the revolution. Give me a strong regiment, gallant colonels will more than once exclaim to their friend, and in 2 seconds I will clean up all this mess. And some of them, as we shall see, will make the attempt. But they will have to repeat Kabalov's words. The regiment starts under a brave officer, but there are no results. Yes, and how could there be results? The most reliable of all possible forces have been the police and the gendarmes and the training squads of certain regiments. But these proved as pitiful before the assault of the real masses as the battalion of St. George, and the officers' training schools were to prove 8 months later in October. Where could the monarchy get that Salvation Regiment, ready and able to enter a prolonged and desperate duel with a city of 2 million? The revolution seems defenseless to these verbally so enterprising colonels, because it is still terrifically chaotic. Everywhere, aimless movements, conflicting currents, whirlpools of people, individuals astounded as though suddenly gone deaf, unfastened trench coats, gesticulating students, soldiers without rifles, rifles without soldiers, boys firing into the air, 1,000-voiced tumult, hurricanes of wild rumor, false alarms, false rejoicing. Enough, you would think, to lift a sword over all that chaos, and it would scatter apart and leave never a trace. But that is a crude error of vision. It is only seeming chaos. Beneath it is proceeding an irresistible crystallization of the masses around new axes. These innumerable crowds have not yet clearly defined what they want, but they are saturated with an acid hatred of what they do not want. Behind them is an irreparable historic avalanche. There is no way back. Even if there were someone to scatter them, they would be gathering again in an hour, and the second flood would be more furious and bloodier than the first. After the February days, the atmosphere of Petrograd became so red hot that every hostile military detachment arriving in that mighty forge, or even coming near to it, scorched by its breath, is transformed, loses confidence, becomes paralyzed, and throws itself upon the mercy of the victor without a struggle. Tomorrow, General Ivanov, sent from the front by the Tsar with the battalion of the Knights of St. George, will find this out. In 5 months, the same fate will befall General Kornilov, and in 8 months it will happen to Kerensky. On the streets in the preceding days, the Cossacks had seemed the most open to persuasion. It was because they were the most absurd. The most abused, though absurd is probably apt as well. Sorry. On the streets in the preceding days, the Cossacks had seemed the most open to persuasion. It was because they were the most abused. But when it came to the actual insurrection, the cavalry once more justified its conservation reputation and lagged behind the infantry. On the 27th, it was still preserving the appearance of watchful neutrality. Though Khabalov no longer relied upon it, the revolution still feared it. The fortress of Peter and Paul, which stands on an island in the Neva opposite the Winter Palace and the palaces of the Grand Dukes, remained a puzzle. Behind its walls, the garrison of the fortress was, or seemed to be, a little world completely shielded from outside influences. The fortress had no permanent artillery, except for that antiquated cannon which daily announced the noon hour to Petrograd. But today, field guns are set up on the walls and aimed at the bridge. What are they getting ready for? The Tsarist staff has worried all night what to do about the fortress, and in the fortress they were worrying. What will the revolution do with us? By morning the puzzle is solved, on condition that officers remain inviolable. The fortress will surrender to the Tsarist palace. Having analyzed the situation, not so difficult a thing to do, the officers of the fort hasten to forestall the inevitable march of events. Toward evening of the 27th, a stream of soldiers, workers, students, and miscellaneous people flows toward the Tsarist palace. Here they hope to find those who know everything, to get information and instructions. From all sides, ammunition is being carried by armfuls into the palace and deposited in a room that has been converted into an arsenal. At nightfall, the revolutionary staff settles down to work. It sends out detachments to guard the railway stations and dispatches reconnoitering squads wherever danger lurks. The soldiers carry out eagerly and without a murmur, although very unsystematically, the orders of the new authorities. But they always demand a written order. The initiative in this probably came from the fragments of the military staff which had remained with the troops, or from the military clerks. But they were right. It is necessary to bring order immediately into the chaos. The staff, as well as the newborn Soviet, had as yet no seals. The revolution has still to fit itself out with the implements of bureaucratic management. In time, this will be done. Alas, too well. The revolution begins a search for enemies. Arrests are made all over the city, arbitrarily, as the liberals will say reproachfully later. But the whole revolution is arbitrary. Streams of people are brought into the Tsarist under arrest. Such people as the chairman of the state council, ministers, policemen, secret servicemen, the pro-German countess, whole broods of gendarme officers. Several statesmen, such as Protopopov, will come of their own volition to be arrested. It is safer so. The walls of the chamber, which had resounded to hymns in praise of absolutism, now heard but sobbing and sighs. The countess will subsequently relate. An arrested general sank down exhausted on a nearby chair. Several members of the Duma kindly offered me a cup of tea. Shaken to the depths of his soul, the general was saying excitedly, "Countess, we are witnessing the death of a great country." Meanwhile, the great country, which had no intention of dying, marched by these people of the past, stamping its boots, clanging the butts of its rifles, rending the air with shouts, and stepping all over their feet. A revolution is always distinguished by its impoliteness, probably because of the ruling classes did not take the trouble in good season to teach the people fine manners. Trotsky is a fool with it. Once again, the jokes do not stop. The jokes do not stop. Trotsky was, bruh, what's the name of a Jewish writer or screenwriter in Hollywood who's known for writing comedies? Because that's Trotsky, bruh. Trotsky would have been fire if he was sent to Hollywood. Just the funniest, bruh. What the fuck? A revolution is always distinguished by its impoliteness. Probably because the ruling classes did not take the trouble in good season to teach the people fine manners. I mean, come on, man. That's comedy. That's top tier comedy, bruh. Oh, shit. The Tsarist became the temporary field headquarters, governmental center, arsenal, and prison fortress of the revolution, which had not yet wiped the blood and sweat from its face. Into the whirlpool, some enterprising enemies also made their way. A disguised captain of gendarmes was accidentally discovered taking down notes in a corner, not for history but for the court-martials. The soldiers and workers wanted to end him right there, but people from the staff interfered and easily led the gendarme out of the crowd. The revolution was then still good-natured, trustful, and kind-hearted. It will become ruthless only after a long series of treasons, deceits, and bloody trials. The first night of the triumphant revolution was full of alarms. The improvised commissars of the railway terminals and other points, most of them chosen haphazard from the intelligentsia through personal connection, upstarts and chance acquaintances of the revolution. Non-commissioned officers, especially of worker origin, would have been more useful, got nervous, saw dangers on all sides, nagged the soldiers, and ceaselessly telephoned to the Tsarist asking for reinforcements. But in the Tsarist, too, they were nervous. They were telephoning. They were sending out reinforcements, which for the most part did not arrive. Those who receive orders, said a member of the Tsarist night staff, do not execute them. Those who act without orders. The workers' district act without orders. The revolutionary chiefs who have led out their factories, seized the police stations, called out the soldiers, and wrecked the strangleholds of the counter-revolution, do not hurry to the Tsarist palace, to the staffs, to the administrative centers. On the contrary, they jerk their heads in that direction with irony and distrust. Those brave boys are getting in early to divide the game they didn't kill, before it's even killed. Worker Bolsheviks, as well as the best workers of the other left parties, spend their days on the streets, their nights in the district headquarters, keeping in touch with the barracks and preparing tomorrow's work. On the first night of the victory they continue, and they enlarge, the same work they have been at for the whole 5 days and nights. They are the young bones of the revolution, still soft as all revolutions are in the first days. All right, we're reaching our final paragraph for today's reading. So if you have any comments or questions, put it in the chat. I will read it before we log off for the day. It's been a long read. I know it's been tough for, people who are working, or if you're at school or you're doing something else, but I appreciate you sticking with me to the end if you saw this. All right. So, yeah, it says chat disconnected. I don't know why the chat disconnected in the horizontal view. That's strange. Anyway, Kareth says, it's probably been over 40 years since I saw it with my mom as a kid, but I'll check it out after this reading. Okay. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Kareth J., what movie you're talking about, but maybe you're talking about Matawan. Maybe. Anyway. All right. On the 27th, Nabokov, already known to us as a member of the Cadet Center, and at that time working, a legalized deserter, at General Headquarters, went to his office as usual and stayed there until 3 o'clock, knowing nothing of the events. Toward evening, shots were heard on the Morskaya. Nabokov listened to them from his apartment. Armored cars dashed along. Individual soldiers and sailors ran past, sliding along the wall. The respected liberal observed them from the side windows of his vestibule. The telephone continued to function, and my friends, I remember, kept me in touch with what was going on during the day. As the usual time, we went to bed. This man will soon become one of the inspirators of the revolutionary provisional government, occupying the position of general administrator. Tomorrow an unknown old man will approach him on the street, a bookkeeper perhaps, or a teacher, bow low and remove his hat and say to him, "Thank you for all that you have done for the people." Nabokov, with modest pride, will relate the incident himself. And that's the end of chapter 7. That's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8, who led the February insurrection? That is a great question. We will find out more. That was a profound chapter, very inspiring, very deep. I really, really liked that chapter, and hopefully you did too. We're going to cut off the live stream now, but let's take a look at the polls. I can't see the poll results yet. Okay. Stalin or Trotsky in the horizontal live stream. We have 67% for permanent revolution and socialism in one country with 33% with 3 votes. Interesting. Okay, let's go now to this live stream right here, the vertical one. Let's see what the results are. Hold on. All right, let's end this poll. All right, I like the results here. Stalin or Trotsky, unsure, but fuck Donald Trump and MAGA with 62% of the votes. Socialism in one country with 14%, and permanent revolution at 14%. Very interesting. I still like those results no matter what. Anytime you say fuck Donald Trump and fuck MAGA, I'm definitely with you. Anyway, this has been a cool reading. I really enjoyed this, but man, I'm tired. I'm about to enjoy my weekend. Y'all be easy out there. All power to the people. Tune in for tomorrow's episode when we read chapter 8, and peace.